3 weeks before Christmas, I was standing in 4 inches of frozen mud under my own boathouse, and I already knew how this story was going to end. Not the whole story, just the part that mattered. Because in my hand was a blue folder, water-stained at the corner, and inside that folder was a permit stamped with my contractor's license number on it. Remember that folder. Everything that happens after this comes back to it, but we weren't there yet. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was standing on a porch in the dark, my breath fogging up in front of the porch light, and my brother-in-law was on the other side of the door, with his headlights still running in my driveway, about to find out that concrete remembers things people would rather forget. Welcome to Revenge Tales, where the quiet ones always keep the receipts. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let me take you back to where this actually started, because you need to understand the foundation before you can watch it crack. My name is Dana Ferreira. I'm 44 years old, and I run a small construction outfit outside Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Foundations, framing, the unglamorous end of building things that last. I've poured concrete in January at -10 degrees. I don't scare easy, and I don't say things I don't mean, which my husband Mike's family found charming for the exactly first 2 years I knew them. We have 2 kids, 12 and 15, and most of my life is a lot less dramatic than this story makes it sound. Job sites, school pickup, invoices at the kitchen table after everyone's in bed. I mention that because I want you to understand I wasn't looking for a fight with my in-laws. I was just a woman who did solid work, expected to be treated like an adult in return, and got quietly written out of the ledger instead. Mike's family had a cabin on Cedar Lake. Not a cabin the way you're picturing, a proper 4-bedroom lake house with a boathouse and a dock that his grandfather built in 1962. The kind of place that shows up in every family photo for 3 generations. It belonged to all of them, technically. Mike, his brother Grant, and their mother, Paulette Whitfield, who still held the deed in her name and treated the cabin like a monarchy she governed from a folding chair on the dock. Grant Whitfield was the golden one, ran a boat dealership 2 towns over, drove a truck nicer than his revenue could really justify, and had a way of making a room agree with him before anyone had finished a sentence. He was likable. That's the part people don't want to hear in these stories. He wasn't a cartoon. He remembered your birthday. He'd show up to help you move a couch on a Saturday and refuse gas money for the truck. He was by every surface measure a good guy. Good guys just don't always mean what they say. Mike is quieter than his brother, which I used to think meant steadier. Mike grew up in Grant's shadow the way a lot of younger brothers do, always the one asking permission, always the one who let a room's energy get set by somebody else before he added his own. When we got married, I understood without either of us saying it out loud that I was marrying into a family where Grant's version of events usually became the family's version of events, whether or not it was accurate. I thought I was too solid to be talked around. I remember the first 4th of July I ever spent with the Whitfields, 4 months into dating Mike. Grant had a boat out on the lake by 9 in the morning, towing every kid in a 3-cabin radius on an inner tube. And by the time the sun went down, he'd organized a bonfire, remembered to grab a lighter, and made a point of introducing me to every neighbor who wandered over like I'd been part of the family for years. I liked him immediately. Everyone liked him immediately. That's what made it work later, when he needed a room to believe him over me. Nobody had any practice doubting Grant. Paulette ran that cabin like it was a small nation with a very specific constitution, one she'd amend verbally whenever it suited her. She loved her sons in a way that was real, and also, I'd come to learn, deeply unequal in how it got applied. Grant got the benefit of the doubt. Mike got the responsibility. I got whatever category was left over once those two were accounted for. Here's the debt, and I want you to have the exact number, because numbers are the only thing in this story that never lied to me. 3 years ago, the cabin's foundations started failing, real failure, hairline cracks turning into inch-wide gaps, the north wall sinking 2 degrees off level. Grant didn't have the cash, Paulette didn't want to touch her savings, so I did it. $42,300 in materials, equipment, and labor, most of it mine, some of it subbed out at cost because I called in favors from other contractors. I pulled the permits under my own license number because that's how you do it right, and I didn't ask for a contract. Family doesn't need a contract, Mike said. I believed him. I remember the week I did that work more clearly than I remember most weeks of my own life. Late October, ground half frozen already, and I had a crew out there for 11 days because I refused to let it drag into a second winter with that wall sinking further. I ate dinner standing up in my truck more nights than not. Mike brought coffee out twice. Grant came by once, watched for 20 minutes, told me it was looking good, and left before we'd broken for lunch. Paulette brought out a plate of cookies on day 3 and told me I was a lifesaver, which at the time felt like enough. That was the seed right there, before the seed that actually mattered. Because 8 months after I fixed that foundation, we were all at the cabin for 4th of July, and Grant said something over the grill that I heard perfectly clearly, and that everyone else let slide like it was nothing. Someone had asked whose idea the new dock lighting was, and Grant said, "Some of us built this family. Some of us just married into it." He said it smiling. He said it like a joke. Nobody laughed, and nobody corrected him either. I want you to hold on to that sentence. You didn't build this. You married into it. It's going to come back. Before I go further, if you've ever been the one who quietly kept a family standing while somebody else took the credit for it, I want to hear that story in the comments. This channel exists for you. After that 4th of July, things didn't happen all at once. They happened the way erosion happens, slow, plausible, deniable, one incident at a time. In September, there was a group text about repainting the dock, and I noticed I'd been left off it. When I mentioned it to Mike, he said it was probably an accident. In October, at a family dinner to plan Thanksgiving, my chair got moved to the end of the table without anyone deciding to move it. It just happened, the way these things just happen. In November, Paulette mentioned almost gently that big decisions about the cabin should probably stay with the actual family, and when I asked what that meant, she smiled and said she didn't mean anything by it. There was one more crack in that wall before the real one showed up. At Thanksgiving, Grant stood up to give a toast, thanked the family for another year at the cabin, and went around the table naming people. Paulette for holding it all together, Mike for always showing up, his own kids for keeping the tradition alive, and skipped straight past me to the mashed potatoes. Nobody said anything. I raised my glass anyway, because making a scene over a toast felt small, and I told myself I was choosing my battles. I didn't know yet that I was about to run out of small ones to choose. If you've ever sat at a table and watched someone erase you one polite omission at a time, you already know exactly how quiet that kind of hurt is. Tell me in the comments if you've lived it. I read every one, and this channel is built for stories like that one. Then came the discovery, and this is where the blue folder comes back in. In early December, I stopped by the county recorder's office for an unrelated permit on another job, and the clerk, who's known me for years, mentioned, in passing, that she'd pulled a title search on Cedar Lake Court that week for a real estate closing. I hadn't heard anything about a sale. Nobody in the family had mentioned a sale. Cedar Lake Court, she said, flipping through the folder without really thinking about it. Big one, Lake Development Company out of Minneapolis, already under contract, closing set for the second week of January. She must have caught something in my face because she paused and added, "You didn't know?" I told her I didn't. She apologized for assuming I did, since my name was all over the permit history for that address, and went back to her own stack of files. I stood in that recorder's office for a full minute after she walked away, doing math I didn't want to be doing, in a building that smelled like old paper and radiator heat, feeling the exact sensation I feel before a wall I'm inspecting turns out to be worse than it looked from the outside. Grant was selling the cabin, quietly, before Christmas, before anyone could organize a family vote, before Mike or I had any idea it was even on the table. And here's the part that made my stomach drop. Because the deed was in Paulette's name alone, and because I'd never filed a lien or a formal contract for the foundation work, there was nothing on paper connecting my $42,000 to that property. If it sold, that money simply evaporated. No claim, no recourse, no proof I'd ever put a shovel in that ground. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold and pulled every folder I had on the Cedar Lake job. 3 years of invoices, subcontractor receipts, inspection sign-offs, photos I'd taken of the footings before we poured, all of it. Mike found me there at midnight, and when I told him what the clerk had said, he went pale in a way that told me he genuinely hadn't known either. That was the one piece of relief in an otherwise terrible night. Whatever else was true, my own husband wasn't in on it. Except for one thing, the permits. I'd pulled every single one of them under my own contractor's license number, because that's the legally correct way to do foundation work, and those permits were sitting in the county system, tied to my name, not Grant's, not Paulette's. Any sale, any closing, any title transfer required those permits to be closed out and released, and the only person who could sign that release was me. Remember the blue folder? That folder had every permit, every inspection sign-off, every invoice with the county stamp on it. It was the one piece of paper trail in this entire mess that had my name on it in ink the county would recognize. Grant didn't know it existed. He'd forgotten, if he'd ever known at all, that a permit isn't just a formality, it's a legal thread, and I was still holding the other end of it.
I didn't scream. I didn't call Mike in a panic. I did what I do when a wall is cracking. I called someone who actually understood structural failure. In this case, a real estate attorney named Priya Shah, who I'd worked with on commercial jobs for a decade. I laid out the permits, the invoices, the timeline, the sale. She confirmed what I suspected. I couldn't file a retroactive lien this many years out. That door had closed. But the open permits were mine, on record, and no title company in the state would close on that property without a permit release signed by the license holder of record, which was me. I met Priya at her office on a Thursday morning, the blue folder on the table between us like evidence at a trial, and I laid out 3 years of paperwork the way I'd lay out a set of blueprints, chronologically, clearly, no editorializing. She read through the permit file twice before she said anything. Then she looked up and said, "Dana, do you understand what you're holding? You don't need a lien. You have something better. You have leverage nobody remembered to take away from you." She walked me through it slowly, the way I'd walk a client through a bid. The title company's attorney would flag the open permits automatically during closing review, no way around it, no way to quietly bury it, because permit releases get pulled straight from the county system. My name was the only name on that release. Not Grant's, not Paulette's, mine. I sat with that for 2 days. Every instinct told me to march into that cabin and tell Grant exactly what I thought of him. I decided against it. Loud doesn't win. Paper wins. So instead, on a Tuesday in mid-December, I did 3 things. I filed a formal notice with the county recorder flagging the open permits as unresolved and requiring licensee sign-off before any transfer. I sent certified letters, 4 of them, 1 to Grant, 1 to Paulette, 1 to Mike, and 1, as a courtesy and a warning, to the buyer's real estate attorney, laying out in plain administrative language that the sale could not close without my signature, and that my signature was contingent on repayment of $42,300 for services rendered in good faith. Priya reviewed every word before they went out. No accusations, no emotion, just facts and figures, dates and amounts, the same tone I'd use writing up a change order. I signed all 4 the same afternoon, dropped them at the post office myself, and asked for tracking on every one so I'd know exactly when each envelope landed. Then I went home, made dinner, and waited. The reaction cascade started slow. 2 missed calls from Grant on Wednesday morning, both unanswered, both followed by a text that just said, "Call me." By Thursday, it was 6 calls, plus a voicemail from Paulette that started warm. "Dana, sweetheart, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding with the county," and ended sharp, her voice tightening on the word ridiculous by the end of it. By Friday, it was 11 missed calls total between the 2 of them, and 1 from the buyer's real estate attorney, who was, understandably, asking a great many pointed questions about why a multi-million-dollar closing had hit a wall made of paperwork nobody remembered existed. Somewhere in there, Grant's composure cracked exactly once, a voicemail at 11:40 on a Friday night, his voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "Dana, please, just call me back. We can figure this out. This doesn't have to get ugly." No charm left in it at all. Just a man watching a deadline get closer than his options. 3 weeks before Christmas, on a Saturday night, Grant and Paulette showed up at my house unannounced. No call ahead, just headlights in my driveway at 8:30, and Grant standing on my porch in the cold with his hands jammed in his coat pockets, looking like a man who'd finally done the math on his own dealership's finances and didn't like the number. I let them stand there a minute before I opened the door. "You need to sign the release," Grant said. "No hello. The deal falls apart in 10 days if you don't." "Then it falls apart," I said. Paulette tried the soft angle. "Dana, honey, this is a family matter. We shouldn't be doing this over paperwork." "We are doing this over paperwork because paperwork is the only thing in this family that ever told the truth. You have a title search with my license number on every permit for that foundation, $42,300 in materials and labor. Every inch of that north wall is standing because of concrete I paid for and poured myself. I have the invoices. I have the county stamps. I have 4 certified letters that are sitting in an attorney's file right now, and my name is the only name on that release." Grant tried a different angle. "This isn't about the cabin, Dana. This is about you being upset over one comment I made a year and a half ago." "I told you you married into this family," I said. "You didn't build it," you said. "Some of us built this family, some of us just married into it." "Well, Grant, I want you to look at the county file, because my name is the one stamped on the foundation this whole family is still standing on. I didn't marry into it, I poured it." Grant's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I was joking." 11 missed calls in 3 days isn't the reaction of a man who thinks it was a joke, I said. "You've never once in a year and a half corrected what you said. Not to me, not at another dinner. Silence is a position, Grant. Same as concrete. It sets." Paulette tried once more, quieter this time. "We could have handled this like a family." "You had a year and a half to handle it like a family," I said. "You handled it like a business you thought I didn't know I had a stake in." Then I did the thing I'd promised myself in the truck on the drive home that night. I laid it out for them, item by item, the way I'd read a client a final invoice. $42,300 in materials and labor, October, 3 years ago. 1 comment about marrying in versus building it, 4th of July, 18 months ago. Left off the dock lighting group text, September, moved to the end of the table, October, told my opinion on big decisions didn't count, November, skipped in a toast that named every other adult at that table this Thanksgiving, and now a closing scheduled without a word to me on a foundation I poured with my own hands. I let that sit in the cold air a second. "That's the ledger, Grant. I've got the receipts for every single line." Grant didn't have an answer for the list. Nobody ever does once it's actually counted out loud instead of felt in pieces. He stood there on my porch step with his hands still in his coat pockets, and for the first time in a year and a half, he didn't have a smile ready to smooth it over. That's when it cracked. Not his temper, his composure. Grant sat down on my porch step in the cold, elbows on his knees, and told me, in a voice that had lost every ounce of its usual polish, that the dealership was underwater, had been for a year, that 2 lenders were circling and a balloon payment was due in March, and that the cabin sale was the only thing keeping him from losing everything he'd spent 15 years building. "I wasn't trying to cut you out to be cruel," he said. "I was drowning, and the cabin was the only rope I had left, and I told myself the details would sort themselves out later." I believed him. Panic explained the sentence. It didn't excuse it, and it definitely didn't refund it. Paulette stood there in her coat, arms crossed against the cold, saying nothing for once, watching her golden sun run out of polish on my front step. I don't think she'd ever seen that particular version of him before either. I told them my terms, and I said them once, calmly, the way I'd say a bid to a client. The $42,300 gets repaid in full, in writing, notarized, before any permit release gets signed. Any future decision about that cabin, sale, renovation, anything structural includes me, in writing as an equal voice, not a courtesy invite. And the sale to the Minneapolis buyer could proceed on that timeline, or it could fall through. Either way, I told them, the foundation isn't moving until the paperwork says I'm standing on equal ground. Grant looked at his mother, Paulette looked at the frozen lawn. Neither of them looked at me for a long moment, and I let the silence do its own work, the way I let concrete cure without touching it.
"Fine," Grant finally said. "Notarized, in writing, all of it." They agreed because the closing date was 10 days out and I was the only signature standing between them and a deal worth more than either of them wanted to admit out loud. They didn't have a choice, and we all knew it. Here's what happened after, and I'll take them one at a time because each of them earned their own ending. Grant repaid the $42,300 within 6 weeks, mostly by selling his second boat and taking a personal loan against the dealership. The Minneapolis sale closed in February instead of January, on my terms, with my signature finally on a document that mattered. He's never once, in 2 years since, made another comment about who built what in this family. He still sends a birthday text every year. I still answer it. Some things don't need to be destroyed to be corrected. Paulette added both my name and Mike's name to a formal family trust for the property, replacing her sole ownership entirely, something her own attorney had apparently been telling her to do for years, and she'd always waved off as unnecessary paperwork. She never apologized outright, not in words, but she started including me on the group text without anyone having to ask twice. That was her version of it. Mike apologized for the years he spent calling it an accident, calling it nothing, calling it anything other than what it was. We're still working through what that apology actually means in practice, because an apology is a start, not a foundation. I told him that. He understood the metaphor better than most people would. Priya Shah still gets a Christmas card from me every year because she's the reason I understood what I was actually holding before it was too late to use it. And the blue folder still sits in my filing cabinet, right where I can reach it, because a family that only respects you when you're holding proof is a family you'd better keep proof for. I don't pull it out anymore to prove anything to anyone. I keep it because it reminds me what I'm actually capable of building and what I'm no longer willing to build quietly. If watching someone finally get the credit they poured into the ground themselves felt good, that's exactly why this channel exists. So hit subscribe because next week, another quiet one stops covering the shortfall. Blood doesn't pour concrete, commitment does, and the foundation always remembers who actually built it. Before you go, tell me in the comments what your version of the blue folder is, the proof you kept just in case. I read every single one of them, and I'll see you in the next story. Subscribe to Revenge Tales because the quiet ones are always the ones still standing when the walls come down.